Hi, I'm Jodie and welcome back to the Jodie Makes podcast. Hi, I'm Jodie. I'm a knitter and crocheter based in the northwest of England, and this is a podcast where I tell you all about what I've been making recently. I make these videos every other Sunday, 9 AM UK time, and so if you do enjoy the video today, I would love it if you click the like button because that really helps the channel out. And you're also welcome to subscribe to see what I get up to. And just before we get started with the projects that I've been working on since the last podcast, I do just want to touch on what I'm wearing. This is my Seaborn tee by Herb Garden Knitwear. So this is a DK weight knitted t-shirt which I've made in Drops Bell in the shade 03, which is like the sandy beige colour, and the navy blue. Not too sure of the number for that one off the top of my head. And the main feature that it's got is this sort of shell, twisted ribbed shell detail that is on the arms and also the hem of the body as well. I have actually knit this garment twice. So the first time I made it in sort of like the creamy colour and the navy blue. Wasn't massively keen on the colour combination just on me. And also because this is a bottom up garment, I just made that a little bit too short. I followed the specified pattern repeats, but I've got quite a long torso, and so it was coming up like hilariously short on me. And because it's bottom up, I found it really difficult to modify that. Now I did actually try to do sweater surgery on that. Is it still sweater surgery if it's a t-shirt? Jury's out on that. Anyway, I tried to go back and fix the length, and I did really well. You know, I cut into the garment, I unravelled the little bits that I needed to, I put everything on the needles, I knit the extra length. I managed to Kitchener it back together all the way around, but then I just really struggled with the join when I got back to the beginning. Just trying to make that initial hole where the two ends of the Kitchener stitch meet each other. I couldn't really find any tutorials online to show me how to sort of seam that back together. And so I ended up with a hole in the side of it, which I wasn't super keen on. And so I re-knit the garment. I didn't use the beige colour because I thought if I'm not too keen on the colour and I'm going to have to remake it anyway, I might as well change the colour combination. So I reused the navy blue, but then I switched out to the 03 from the 02. Much prefer the colour combination, and much prefer the length. But yeah, this is my Seaborn tee by Herb Garden Knitwear. And now to get into the projects. So I do have a finished object for you this week, and that is my Yorkshire blanket by Jodie Makes. This pattern recommends that you use multiple different colours and you make 24 different motif granny squares, seam them all together and then add a border. I've made two main modifications to this in that I've done a single colour throughout, and I've also only done 9 squares to make it more of a baby blanket size. Here she is. I am so pleased with this. I bet you can't even see. I don't like to put it in front of my face while I'm talking because I'm conscious that some people will be lip reading, and so I'm trying not to cover my mouth, but I'll put some b-roll in and some pictures maybe. I am so chuffed with this blanket. I think this might be one of the most, if not the most impressive thing I have ever made. So last time I had 7 completed squares, and so since my last video I've completed this motif and this one. I've put little stitch markers on them to remind myself of which one's which. I weaved in all the ends. I have added the sort of sashing that goes round each square, and then finished off the border with this, I think she calls it a sunset border. It's absolutely gorgeous. I'm really pleased that it's finished because my sister's baby shower is on Sunday and I need to give this to her then. A couple of things on this. So because in the pattern you're supposed to work the squares in different colours and then work the border in a different colour to all of the squares, one thing that I did notice in making it just one colour is that I actually ended up with a lot more ends than I could have done if I'd have read through the whole pattern before I got started. Each of these squares sort of finishes, if I put my fingers there, that's where the square finishes. And then you do a round of single crochet and a round of double crochet, and then you do a further round to sort of join as you go. Had I read through the pattern before I started, I probably would have just done that single crochet and the double crochet of the border as part of the square, because I essentially finished the square off and then had to do 3 more rounds and then connect one side. So the way that you do the join as you go, if you've got a completed square, you can just join as you go all the way around and sort of connect every single square in a single piece of yarn, like 2 ends, one at the beginning, one at the end. The way that this has it, you do it, you end up having to join each square 2 at a time, and so you get an extra couple of ends per square. So I could join this one to that one, and then that one to that one, and then this one to that one, and you work it that way. Whereas if I'd have put the first 2 rounds of the border just into the square, I could have just continually joined as I went throughout the whole blanket. So that's just something to bear in mind if you are doing a monochrome Yorkshire blanket. It's probably worth reading through the full pattern before you get started, because you can actually incorporate the first 2 rounds of the border into the actual square, and that'll save you some weaving in of ends. And the other thing about this, and I don't know whether I should message Me Makes about this, so the thing that drew me to this blanket the most was the border. My sister sent me a couple of inspiration pictures when I said that I was going to make a blanket for the baby. Both of the pictures that she sent me had really beautiful sort of scalloped borders, and so I really wanted to do the sunset border. Again, I did not read through the whole pattern before I started, and that caused me some problems, so probably won't be doing that again where I'm significantly modifying something. I didn't realise that making the blanket smaller was going to be such a significant modification to this. However, in the pattern it does say that this border will only work on this blanket if you have an even number of squares, and obviously my blanket's 3 by 3, but I've still managed to make the border work. So without giving away too much and without giving away any numbers, the way that the border is supposed to work is that the number of stitches that you need for the border is divisible by the same amount of stitches that you get across 2 squares. So in theory, you're supposed to get along the border, and the border is supposed to finish at the end of every 2 squares. And so if you have an odd number of squares, you would end up getting to the end where this corner is, and it wouldn't line up. But like I say, I was absolutely desperate to do this border. This was the thing about the pattern that I was most interested in, and so I've got a knitting calculator app on my phone that I paid for a while ago, and I think it was something like £3, and it's well been worth it. So definitely had my money's worth out of that. So the number of stitches from corner to corner, like across the edge, and then the number of stitches that I needed for the border, and then from that I worked out how many stitches I needed to decrease across the row so that I could start the border. And then when I did the first row of the border, I just made sure that I decreased those stitches out, and that has meant that I've been able to do the border. But it was simple enough to do, and it's not caused any issues. I did block this. I've not blocked it aggressively, I didn't pin it or anything. I did sort of shake it out while it was wet, just to sort of try and even it out as much as I could, because there was a little bit of rippling around some of the seams with the squares not being exactly the same size anyway. And so I think that also helped just like let the border sit quite nicely, because I was a little bit worried that with those decreases that I might get a little bit of puckering. And so I'm not sure if I should just message Me Makes and just say, I managed to make your border work with an odd number of squares, and maybe you should add that to the pattern for other people to do, because this is such a nice baby blanket. Like, and there's also so many configurations of this where you would end up with an odd number of squares. Like if you just did the 12 different motifs once, you'd then end up with a blanket that in most configurations would end up with at least one side that had an odd number of squares. So I really think that it would add value to the pattern if she made that amendment where you could just decrease some of the extra stitches out. The one thing that I did have with this blanket was I made all the squares, I seamed it together, I did all the border, I got most of the way around the border. So I'd done, I think it's a 4-row border, and I was on the 4th row, and I had about 1 square on one side and then 1 side left, and I ran out of yarn. I don't play yarn chicken very often, so I don't like losing yarn chicken. That's why I don't play yarn chicken very often. So thankfully this was a yarn that I could pick up from Hobbycraft, so it was just a case of driving to Hobbycraft and picking that up. I didn't need to sort of wait for anything to be shipped to me. Was a bit annoying that I had to drive all the way to my local Hobbycraft, because I don't have a local Hobbycraft. My local Hobbycraft is quite the drive away. Pick up 1 ball, and I used up so little of that ball that I had to buy a 100-gram skein, because that's the smallest size that this type of yarn comes in, and I still have more than 100 grams of that skein left, because clearly it had more than 100 grams in it and I used very little of it. So this was supposed to be a stash bus project. I had 2 skeins of Make the Change, which is the yarn that I made this out of, in stash. I bought a further 2 thinking that that would be enough to finish the blanket, and then I had to buy another one, but I basically have a full skein left because I used so little of it. And so I made this blanket hoping that I would use 2 skeins up. I used those 2 skeins, but I have ended up with a further 1 skein going back into stash off the back of it. And so for all of the work that went into this blanket, I've only actually reduced my stash by 100 grams. Oh well, you win some, you lose some, right? In terms of stats, this is made using Knitcraft's Make the Change. I used 4 full skeins, and I'm just going to say it's 400 grams because I've ended up with a full skein left over essentially. 400 grams out of stash for that project comes in 100 gram skeins. Those skeins are £3.30 a piece, and so this project should have cost me £16.50 in yarn to finish. However, I had a couple of Hobbycraft vouchers when I was buying the various bits of this, and so in total it cost me £9 in yarn. The pattern was £10, and so the project all in all cost me £19. But yeah, absolutely thrilled with this. Hope that my sister likes it. And although I am at the baby shower on Sunday, this video is going up after the baby shower. But yeah, really excited to give that to her and hope she loves it as much as I do. So I'm not going to talk about my minnow cardigan this week because I have made 0 progress with it. All that I am going to say is that I think I'm pretty settled on the fact that I'm going to have to rip that out. I think in the last podcast I was talking about how I was a little bit concerned about the lack of the shoulder shaping, and that knitted it up at a DK weight, it was actually coming out a lot thicker and a lot heavier than I was expecting it to. So I've resigned myself to the fact that I'm probably just going to have to knit a swatch of the minnow cardigan stitch pattern at a fingering weight, just see what size that swatch comes out at, and then have a look for some other patterns that are a fingering weight cardigan that I can just put that motif into. And that's probably going to be a little bit closer to what I was hoping for when I cast on that project, but for now I've made no progress on it. I haven't started the swatch, I haven't looked for other patterns and things like that yet, so nothing to talk about there. So the next project that I am working on is my granny square cardigan sweater thing. And so it was originally going to be a cardigan, but I think I'm now going to turn it into a summer sweater. It was inspired by a picture that I'd seen from a garment, I think it was made by Apricot, but I'd seen it on the Next website, and essentially really liked the configuration of it, liked the fact that it was crochet. I think it was one of those price points where it was definitely more expensive than you'd normally see for fast fashion, but it looked like it was a genuine crochet piece. And it certainly wasn't expensive enough to be a genuine crochet piece. I am now up to 9 total completed sort of granny square motifs, and I've started on the 10th one. Now, I have now put this on hold temporarily because of one of my newer cast-ons, so I'll get onto that soon. And I'm working that project up in Drops Bell in the shade 01 white, 03, which I think is called Sandy Beige, and 15, which I think is called Jeans Blue. These are all yarns that I had in my stash originally in sort of scrappy amounts, and I have since had to buy a little bit more Drops Bell just to finish that off. And I'm sensing a bit of a theme here. So we have another project that's gone on hold. So I think in the last podcast I showed you this square, which was intended to be one of the panels of a cloud bow top, but what I said last time is I'd essentially ripped this yarn out of another project where I'd held mohair double, and I said that I was really struggling to separate the 2 strands of the mohair, and so rather than look for a pattern that used a single strand of mohair, I would just try making a cloud bow with the mohair held double. Once I'd knit up this swatch, I decided that I didn't really like the fabric that I was getting. Like, it technically works, but it just looks a bit lumpy bumpy, and I think ultimately it's a little bit fuzzier than I wanted it to be. Like, I don't really know, it looks really uneven. Admittedly I haven't blocked it, but just wasn't feeling it, and also had a few concerns about the colour and the seasonality and just when I was going to wear it and things like that. So I put that aside and I went back to the project that I'd ripped the yarn out of, and specifically the yarn that I'd ripped out of it, because in the last podcast I think I mentioned that I had, I think like a skein and a half. I think looking at my stash tracker, I think it was something like 41, 42 grams of this mohair that I hadn't used in this original project, like left over that I could hold single. So when I did the baths on the cloud bow top, I realised that if I used the 2 skeins that I have in stash that are untouched, I would probably need about a skein, maybe a skein and a half, to make the cloud bow top held single. And so I then embarked on a mission to try to separate out the sort of mohair held double which I'd originally given up on, that I didn't want to do. And so I went back to that. I was successful in managing to rip out a couple of skeins worth in a, oh, I mean, this is part of the problem, right? When I've ripped it out, it's all full of nonsense because it was an absolute pain of a process. So I did manage to get sort of 2-ish skeins worth of yarn that I could then hold single. And then I recast it on with it held single. And that did not necessarily make me feel any better. I still sort of paused on it and was like, is this definitely what I want to do with this yarn? And the more I thought about it, the more I just thought, why don't I just try? Like, I keep on saying, oh, I don't think I'm going to be able to separate the 2 strands of mohair for the yarn that I used for that entire project. It was painful enough getting the 2 skeins. So I went back to the yarn that I ripped out of the project, and I ended up with the original ball that I'd started knitting some of the cloud bow with, the other 2 skeins, the 2 balls that I pulled out, and this whole bag where I'm keeping like the other little balls of this. And this is sort of, I mean, there's all sorts of sizes of balls here, right? Like, the mohair was extremely difficult to separate. Like, some of them are literally just little sort of a few gram nuggets. But ultimately, between the 2 skeins, or the 1.5 skein that I hadn't touched from the original project, not including the bit that I've knitted, which I'm hoping is another gram, we'll see. And that is 171 grams that I've managed to separate into the single strands and wind back up into little balls. I already had 42 grams in my stash, and so I now have 213 grams of this yarn. So I'm finding that this is another one of those projects where I cast it on because I had a certain amount of yarn that I really wanted to use up, and now that I've sort of stepped back and gone, do I actually want this? I think the answer might be no. I do want a cloud bow top. I just don't think I want it in this colour. And I also think that because I've now managed to get so much more yarn out of that original project, I feel like it would be a little bit of a waste to make a cloud bow top and then just have like a random amount left behind. Because this is enough to make a full sort of full length, full sleeve, full long sleeve sweater. And so what I feel like I probably should do is think of a more wintry garment that I could make out of this, either holding it single, so something like not the cumulus, but something of that ilk. Yeah, I'm thinking something loose gauge, something quite drapey, something with long sleeves, something that's quite full length. I'm thinking something with a v-neck, which is what's putting me off the cloud bow, because the original thought was, oh well, maybe I could just keep knitting the cloud bow but just do the long sleeve like top length one, because the pattern comes with a short sleeve top and a long sleeve dress, so I could just do the sleeves from the dress on the top and that would be a long sleeve top. But I'm actually thinking that I think I would prefer a v-neck if I was going to go for something long sleeve, just so that it's not so overwhelming. Like, ultimately mohair is really, really warm, and so practically speaking, I'm thinking if I do loose gauge, if I'm doing a v-neck, that might help with wearability basically. I do have some West Yorkshire Spinners yarn in stash that is about a sweater's quantity. It's fingering weight. It's a similar colour to this, and I did originally think that I could hold the leftovers from the original project for this with that. And so they're my 2 options. So I can either hold this single, or I can hold it double with a fingering weight sort of sock yarn that I've got from West Yorkshire Spinners. So again, what I'm thinking is something with a bit of positive ease, something with a v-neck, something with long sleeves, just something that's a little bit looser fitting and a bit more formal wear maybe. And I can either hold this single, or I can hold it with a fingering weight sock yarn. I haven't had a look for any patterns like that just yet, but if you know of any patterns that would sort of meet those criteria, I'm thinking something on a 5mm needle or above, just something really, really loose gauge and really drapey. Yeah, if you know of any patterns like that, let me know and maybe I'll cast that on. And then the final whip that I'm carrying over from the last video, although I've made quite a bit of progress on this one, is my sort of riff on the camisole number 7 by My Favourite Things. Like I said in the last video, this pattern is not size inclusive, and so I have not purchased it, and I've instead just tried to make something that is, I mean, I want to say inspired by, but I want to make something that's identical to it. So I think last time I showed you this, I might have had just one cup or maybe the front done, but I have since now done the cups at the back, and I've joined it in the round, and I have also finished the decorative increasing and decreasing at the front. Now, one thing that I have done differently in my version is I have made the front and the back identical in terms of the increasing and decreasing. And one thing that I liked about that is that because the front and the back are identical except for the decorative increasing and decreasing, if you didn't want that, you could just wear it backwards and you'd get the same neckline, but you just would have a slightly plainer take on the top. I'm knitting that up in Drop Saffron in the shade 72, which is called Chalk. Is it called Chalk? I'm like really in my head about the name of the colour because I know that I got it wrong in the, yeah, I called it Clay in the last video. It's called Chalk, but shade 72, and it's a really nice, I've got a ball of Drop Saffron in the pure white. If I just hold those together, it's slightly off-white, but it's not a warm shade. Like this is like a sandy colour, you can see that it's not warm toned, it just sort of, it's definitely a cool toned, sort of like a greyish maybe. I wouldn't say it's grey, it's like a warm grey or a cool beige, but yeah, just something a little bit softer than the stark white. And again, I said this in the last video, but I just think that colour just looks a little bit better on me. It's a little bit softer. And yeah, so like I say, I've picked up the front cuffs, the back cuffs, connected everything in the round, done all the decorative increasing and decreasing, and now I just have the delightful task, I'm sure you're all envious of me, of knitting a 25 to 30 centimetre body of a top on a 2mm needle in broken rib stitch. Yay me. So yeah, I think I've done about 10 centimetres of the body, so nearly halfway there, but this is now in the part of the project where it's like firmly a slog. I have tried it on, so I'm pleased with the fit of the top, and I think that it's like nicely cut at the top. It's not too low cut, it's not too high like up on the chest. It's nice sort of like summer level of exposure, and similarly it's a nice gauge where I still get like quite a nice amount of drape, but it's not completely see-through. Like if I wore appropriately coloured undergarments, you wouldn't be able to see them. Yeah, really happy with that. Just hoping that it continues to fly off the needles. I'm really surprised actually with how far I've managed to get on this. I think it's been on the needles for around a month at this point, and considering that I've not been working on this monogamously and it's quite a labour intensive gauge and a labour intensive stitch, and there's sort of increasing, decreasing, things like that, I think I've done alright. And so I would like to have this ready for the, I mean, I'd love to have it done by the end of the month, but realistically, again, I don't want to work on it monogamously, and so I just don't think that that's going to happen. But I would like to wear it very soon, and so I'd like to finish it soon. So that is my camisole number 7-ish. And then for a couple of new cast-ons. So in my last video I did my spring knitting plans. So in my head, England does have 4 seasons, but we really don't experience them as sort of 4 distinct seasons. They all really blend into each other, and we have really cold winters, and we have like one nice week of really nice sunshine. I tend to go on a summer holiday in the summer where you get nice sunshine there. And the spring and the autumn are just sort of like the periods of time in between those two, like very cold, reasonably quite warm, where the weather is like so-so. Like usually it's raining. I live in the northwest of England. We're very well known for our rain. It's usually not super cold, but also not super warm. So the way that I try and do my spring and summer knitting is sort of things that I will be wearing on the warmer days, and autumn winter knitting is stuff that I'm wearing on cooler days. And so when I think about my spring knitting plans, quite a lot of it was thinking ahead to the summer and thinking ahead of like things that I might want to wear. So the thing at the top of the list for me was a Salty Days sweater, but knit not at the recommended yarn at all. So the Salty Days sweater is a worsted weight pattern, I think, and you're intended to knit that up on a DK weight wool and a mohair, I think. I'm knitting mine up in Drop Spell in the shade White, which is a DK weight cotton linen something blend. 53% cotton, 33% viscose and 14% linen, and it's lovely. This is where we've gotten to, and what you're looking at is a completed back panel for my Salty Day sweater. This has currently been on the needles for 5 days. I have been knitting this obsessively. I love it. I love the really sort of open gauge. I love the colour. I love that there's like nice little bits of texture that you get to, and it's very potato chippy, the way that the pattern's written. It breaks it down into each micro section. So like this little bit with like the garter bumps and the lace is its own section, and then you've got this true lace section, and then you get the garter bumps again. And so it's really satisfying to sort of work through each section, and you sort of, oh, I'll just get to the next section, I'll just get to the next section. However, I have already run into a stumbling block with this project. So as I mentioned, this project is intended to be worked up at a worsted weight gauge, and I think it's supposed to be knit up on 5mm needles, and I'm going to knit mine up on a DK weight cotton. So I've ended up knitting mine up on a 3.5mm needle, and I knew that I was going to have to do this. I've had to size up a couple of times, so I think I should be knitting a size extra large based on my bust measurements, but I've ended up having to cast on a 3XL, which again is another reason why we love size inclusive patterns, because it's good for people who actually need size inclusive patterns, but it's also good for people who are sort of semi-straight sized to be able to muck around without having to do too much math. And so I've cast on the size 3XL, but when I bought the yarn, I don't know what happened, because I knew that I was going to be working off gauge, and I knew that there was going to be some jiggery pokery, and I had plenty of Drop Spell in my stash in various different colours that I could have done a swatch in. But when I ordered the amount of Drop Spell for the Salty Days sweater, I ordered the amount of yarn that I needed for the extra large size that I'm not going to be knitting. I did order one extra ball, so I'm not in that bad a position, but I am essentially, I think I'm like 2 skeins short of the recommended yardage for the 3XL, which is the size that I'm working on. So that's why I've paused my crochet granny square sweater cardigan thing, because I essentially thought I have enough of this white in stash to finish this sweater if I pinch some from this one. And so when I thought about these two projects and which one I was most excited to have, ultimately the Salty Days won out. And so I've decided that I'm going to pause my granny square one. I'm going to finish off my Salty Days. If I have to dip into the yarn for the granny square project, then so be it. But I will finish the Salty Days, and then I'll come back to this and get as far as I can. And if I run out of yarn for this, then I'll just have to buy a bit more. The other thing that I was thinking for this is, so I've got 9 squares fully completed. I've got a little bit of the 10th square, and so I only have to do sort of 2.5 squares to finish this, which I'm not exactly sure exactly how much yarn I'd need to do that, but maybe a skein or so. And I got enough yarn for this, so when I worked it out, I think I needed 24 grams of yarn for each square. So again, just over 1 skein, probably just under 1.5 skeins to finish this. But I ordered extra so that I had enough to seam. And so that's where I'm thinking now is, between the 1 extra ball that I already bought for this, if I pinch a ball, the ball that I bought to seam that, then I'm only 1 skein short on the Salty Day sweater. I usually don't use the full recommended yarn amount, and so I'm thinking if I just nick the one that I bought for seaming this, then hopefully I can finish all of the squares and then maybe seam it with like a fingering weight yarn, a different white cotton yarn essentially, that like either some remnants of this one from the next project that I'm going to talk about. If there's no remnants from that, my local yarn shop definitely sells cotton white yarn that I could potentially seam this together with. That's where I'm currently at. I'm sacrificing this project to make sure that I can finish this one, and then only once I finish this one will I go back and do more of the other one. So yeah, really excited, absolutely flying through this, and I'm just really excited to have something for those sort of typical British spring summer days where, so our summer tends to be quite mild. We tend to get 1 week of like really nice weather where like your camisoles are handy, but we're generally like t-shirts or like loose gauge cotton long sleeve tops, and so I'm thinking this would be perfect for that. And so again, I'm just trying to get through this as quickly as I can. I am enjoying making it, but I'm trying to get through it as quickly as I can just because I think I'm going to want to wear it soon. It's going to get into its season for optimal wear. So far, the only concern that I've had with the mucking around with the gauge, I think I'm like 4 or 5 stitches under the stitch gauge, which is why I've had to muck around with the sizing. But my row gauge wasn't that far out, and I think that's because in Katova Kika's samples, she's used a DK weight and a mohair. One thing that I have found is that the row gauge tends to be longer on a DK weight pattern where they actually recommend a single strand of DK versus a DK weight pattern where they recommend a single strand of mohair and a single strand of fingering. And I think that's because obviously like the width of the stitch depends on how much it's going to get filled up, but the depth of it is pretty like consistent based on the thickness of the yarn. I think that's something that makes sense in my head, and so I think I've gotten away with the row gauge thing because of that. However, I am suspicious. So this is a completed back panel, and that just doesn't look very long for the back. Now when I've looked at the pictures, this drop shoulder, like the shoulder of this is quite low down on the back, and so I think you're gonna make up for that. And so what I've done is I've just left the yarn attached for now, although I have just pulled some stitches off there, whoops. So I have just left the yarn attached for now. I don't really know what I'm going to do. If that back panel isn't long enough, I'm going to end up with a bit of an issue, aren't I? Because I'm probably going to end up having to rip it back to the ribbing and extend the ribbing. Don't know. Basically, the approach that I'm going for right now is bury my head in the sand and hope that it's okay. The one thing about this pattern, love the way that it's laid out. Think that it's really, really clear in terms of the instructions. Think it's really satisfying in the way that it separates out the different sections. So you've got that sort of potato chippy, get to the next section piece. One thing I would have really loved to have had in this pattern is a schematic, because, again, because I'm mucking around with a gauge, I would have just liked to have known how long that section should have been. And I think in a few other patterns you would have got some sort of knit to the end of this section and now it should be X amount of length. You don't have that in the Salty Day sweater, and so I'm just having to hope that this is the right length, and once I've added the front panels on, I might have to rip it back to the ribbing and extend it if not, because obviously I don't really want to just add a new motif. I think that'll knock it off a little bit. So yeah, very excited to keep working on that. And then the final project that I've got to talk about this week is another one that I mentioned in my spring knitting plans. Yay for me. And so I feel like I need to give myself a quick pat on the back for doing what I said I was going to do. And this is the beginnings of my granny square beach bag. Obviously since the last podcast I have finished the baby blanket and I have put my granny square project on hold. And so I just wanted to cast on another little crochet project, just so that I had some crochet available if that's what I fancied. You know me, I'm all about having a low number of whips. I'm not a monogamous knitter. I like to have stuff that I can work on, but I also like to have options. And so if I want some fingering weight 2mm needles broken rib, I've got it. If I want something textured and slightly heavier weight so I get through it a bit quicker, I've got some. And if I want some crochet, I've got some. I think one thing that I probably will miss is having a more complicated crochet project on the needles. Now, this is not me saying I am going to cast on a Yorkshire blanket every time I finish a Yorkshire blanket, but I did really enjoy just sort of having something a bit different. One project that I have seen that I think I would really like to make, I think it's another Mima Makes, is the Imagination quilt. It's like a crochet quilted pattern. I think I probably will make one of those eventually. I just don't know when. But anyway, getting to the projects that I'm actually working on. So this is the beginnings of my granny square beach bag. For this project I am using Drop Saffron in the colours 17 and 16, it's just the pure white and the pure black. And I am doing a solid granny square motif, sort of a one colour round switch. And I'm just going to keep on striping those until I'm happy with the square. Essentially, I've got just shy of 4 balls of the white and 5 full skeins of the black. And so what I'm thinking is the outer edge of the granny square where it's finished is going to be black. And I'm going to do a black strap. I'm also planning to line the bag, so I need to get a bit better acquainted with my sewing machine. So if I'm going to use this as my primary beach bag, which is what I'm hoping to do, this is made of cotton, so it's going to go in the wash very easily. So I've had loads of really fun beach bags, but nothing that can go in the wash. And so what I tend to find is they get absolutely destroyed. So I'm looking forward to one that might be able to go in the wash, essentially. So I'm going to do some lining to go on the inside. But I'm also thinking if I'm going to get a lot of use out of it, which if it can go in the wash, I'm hoping that I will be able to, I'm probably not going to get as much use out of it as I'd like to if it doesn't have loads of pockets and stuff like that. And so what I'm probably going to try to do is find a sewing pattern for a bag and like follow instructions to sort of put pockets together and things like that, and adapt that to become a lining for this and sort of make an actual bag and then attach this to the outside as an outer layer, rather than sort of back these and then sew that together. I just think that makes more sense if I granny square this. Sort of like when you do a lined bag in sewing, you'd sew the outer layer and then you'd sew the inner layer as 2 separate pieces and then you'd join them together. I'm thinking if I crochet this together as you would for an unlined crochet bag, and then I sort of attach a lining to it that's sort of separate, that's going to do a couple of things for me. So it's going to give me the option to add pockets and closures and hardware and other things like that, and ultimately make the bag more usable. But it's also going to take the strain off the actual crochet, because this is cotton. There's not a lot of stretch in it, but you do still get a lot of give, like if you pull it. So if you're putting stuff in there, especially like if you manage to get it on a diagonal, you can misshape it quite easily and stretch it. And so ultimately you'd be able to see everything that was in the bag, and things might start to fall out, but it would also just grow and grow and grow eventually. So the lining will also help with that, and doing a lining like that, sort of sewing it as its own separate bag and then sewing this as the outer layer to it, will give me some strength. I've done some granny square bags before, and I have done the sort of method where you make a granny square and then you back it with fabric, and ultimately the granny square seams are what take the weight of the stuff that you put in the bag, and I just don't like it. I think that you end up warping the shape of the bag over time with the weight. So yeah, that's the progress that I've made so far. So this has only been on the hook for 2 days so far, and this is just sort of a when I want something a bit mindless, but that's something that I need to look at. So if I'm listening to something, like essentially the division of labour at the minute is, if I can solely concentrate on my knitting and I'm not doing anything else that requires brain power, I'm going for Salty Days, because that is like my priority project at the minute. That's the one that I am actively working on first. Then if I'm doing something where I am listening to something but I don't need to look at anything, primarily I'm talking about when I'm listening to audiobooks here, I am working on my crochet project. And then if I am watching something else but I want something to do with my hands, I'm doing this because I don't need to look at this either. And so we've got sort of full concentration, zero concentration, and anything in the middle, which is, again, I like to have a range of projects for all of the different types of scenarios where you might want to be working on something. And that's everything for this week. So yeah, a little bit of everything. We've had a finished object, we've had a lot of crochet, we've had a lot of knitting, we've had quite a few failed projects, which not super happy with. So again, if you know of any patterns that I might be able to use my harvested mohair for, please let me know. Again, I'm looking for something sort of drapey, something that's a loose gauge, something that's got a little bit of positive ease to it, something that's got a slightly looser sleeve, preferably something with a v-neck. Happy to hear about your recommendations. And similarly for the Minot cardigan, if you know of any fingering weight cardigan patterns. And for this I'm really not sure. So I know I definitely don't want a round yoke. I think trying to do the maths of putting the Minot cardigan sort of motif, if you will, onto a round yoke would be, I just don't think I'm that advanced yet. I'm pretty comfortable mucking around with gauge. I'm pretty comfortable mucking around with inserting motifs into sort of a straight piece of knitting and fudging the numbers a little bit to make that work. But I think that might be a little bit out of my skill set. And I also think that it would change the design fundamentally. What I quite like about the minnow is that it's sort of columns going down the project. And so I think I'm looking for something that's fingering weight or 4-ply cardigan, drop shoulder or setting sleeve. That would be handy. Other than that, please let me know in the comments what you've been working on. Really interested to hear what you're working on. Also, sorry if there's been glare on my glasses throughout the whole video. I noticed that on my last video there was glare on my glasses. It annoyed me all the way through the editing process. I don't have any sort of formal lighting. I am relying on the wonderful British sun to give me the lighting for my videos. I have a nice big window in front of me. I've mucked around with the curtains this week because ultimately the curtains need to be a little bit open to let some light in, but I appreciate that them letting the sunlight in is what's causing the glare on the glasses. Need to workshop that. Might need to buy a light. At the minute this is a hobby. I'm trying not to spend too much money on it. I already have really expensive hobbies, so I don't want to start having to buy loads of equipment. But if the glare gets too much, although actually if I buy a ring light, is there not just gonna be glare off the ring light? But yeah, if you are, or if you know somebody who makes YouTube videos who wears glasses, tips for how to avoid glasses glare in videos, also welcome in the comments. But yeah, that's me for this week, and see you again soon. Bye.